Now, if you are going to eat meat, yes, even I eat meat, then abide by the following principles. First of all, shellfish and fish and chicken do not have new 5-GC. They have new 5-AC, just like us. But also keep in mind that animal protein, regardless of the animal, regardless of whether it was a fish or a chicken or beef, has a large amount of a protein, an amino acid called methionine. And there is strong evidence that methionine is one of the drivers of aging. And it stimulates a receptor in us called mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin. And there, again, is strong evidence that removing methionine from, say, a pig's diet will allow that pig to live 50% longer than a pig who eats a methionine-enriched diet. 50% longer by removing methionine. And plant proteins have far less methionine than animal proteins. Okay, I don't care. I still want my piece of chicken, I want my piece of fish, I want my beef. As like I always say, you are what you eat, but you are what the thing you're eating ate. Now that means that a cow that was fed a diet of grains and corn, even if it was organic grains and corn, will be a giant lectin bomb, will be a giant inflammatory fat bomb, because the corn and grain is now part of that meat. Similarly, if you get a farm-raised salmon or an organic farm-raised salmon, it is fed organic corn and soybeans. And rather than omega-3 fats that a salmon would give you from the wild, that salmon will actually give you inflammatory omega-6 fats because you've fed it omega-6 fats in the corn, grain, and soybeans. So just the word organic doesn't cut it. You gotta have wild. Similarly with chicken, just because it says organic free range means absolutely nothing. You have to look for pasture-raised poultry. And quite frankly, there are now lectin-light chickens. You can go to lectinlightchickens.com. Farmer Dan, we've had him on the podcast, and get chickens that are not fed lectin-containing foods. North Star also sells a soy corn-free turkey. If you decided that you want new 5-GC in your diet, then please look for grass-fed, grass-finished beef or bison or lamb. Now, it's very difficult to find true pastured grass-fed pork. It can be done. There are porks that are remarkably safe, particularly Iberico pork from Spain, sometimes called 5J. This is prosciutto that has been fed acorns. And if you're actually in Spain or Portugal, you can actually buy hams and pork products that have been strictly fed acorns, which have an amazing omega-3 profile. Now, similarly, prosciutto hams, prosciutto pigs, are fed the rinds of Parmesan cheese as part of their diet. So prosciutto di Parma is actually pretty doggone good for you, and it's regulated. Now, just because something is labeled prosciutto, you gotta look at the label and find out where it came from. American prosciutto is not raised the same way as prosciutto di Parma, and so look for that on the label. Most lamb from New Zealand is grass-fed. About 80% of lamb from Australia is grass-fed. Goats and sheep in general do not like eating grains. Goats love weeds. So goat products are actually one of your best choices. Are there other healthy meat alternatives? Yeah. Upton's natural jackfruit, corn, which is mycelia mushroom based. Get the corn that doesn't have any breading. My favorite, quite honestly, is grounds. It tastes like ground turkey. It works like ground turkey. Make your tacos, your lettuce tacos, please, out of it. Hillary's Root Burger is great. Now, please, please, please avoid fake meats like Beyond Beef and the Impossible Burger. These have glyphosate, they have soy, they have genetically engineered heme, and the last thing you want is a processed plant food that's made to look like a burger. It may be from plants, but it is processed nonetheless. Please stay away. Types of meat that might speed up aging? Hold on. The truth is, all meat speeds up aging. Yes, you heard me right. All meat speeds up aging. And there's actually 3 reasons for that, and I want to go through that for you today. First of all, animal protein has an amino acid called methionine that is much more common in animal protein than in plant protein. Methionine is one of the triggers for a receptor that causes aging in us called mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin. mTOR senses energy availability. And one of the things that mTOR looks for is methionine. So if there's lots of methionine, mTOR tells our cells, hey, it's time to grow, it's time to make babies, it's time to do all sorts of things, including age. If mTOR doesn't sense methionine, it says, ooh, times appear to be rough. This is not a good time to grow. This is a good time to look at every one of our cells and decide who's pulling their weight and who isn't. And the cells that aren't pulling their weight, we tell them to die. It's called autophagy. And we kind of clean up the mess. So as a general rule, a low methionine diet has been shown to extend lifespan dramatically in every animal tested, including pigs. Now, there's one interesting little caveat, and I don't want you to focus on this, but there's another amino acid called glycine. And glycine appears to give a benefit of tolerating methionine in not activating mTOR. But adding several grams of glycine a day to your diet may help protect against a high methionine diet from animal protein. But that's number 1, methionine in animal protein. Number 2, you've heard me write and talk about a compound called TMAO, which is produced by bacteria from animal protein and animal fats in our diet. And according to research, particularly from the Cleveland Clinic, TMAO can damage blood vessels, can damage kidneys, and now there's evidence that it can damage the brain. We know that vegetarians and vegans have very little TMAO in their bloodstream, and I measure TMAO in all my patients. Interestingly, there are some species of fish and shellfish that have preformed TMAO in their flesh. And so TMAO from animal protein and fat can also be from fish, can in fact damage blood vessels. So that's number 2 reason to avoid animal protein and fats. Number 3, red meat, by that I mean beef, lamb, and pork, have a sugar molecule in their flesh, in their blood vessels, called Nu5GC. Humans have a sugar molecule lining our blood vessels called Nu5AC. Fish and chicken have Nu5AC. Now, these two compounds are very similar, but Nu5GC, we can make an antibody against it when we eat beef, lamb, and pork, and it can cause us to attack the linings of our blood vessels by mistake. And so one of the theories of why eating red meat increases the risk of heart disease is this Nu5GC. Now, the other thing that's scary to me is we know that tumors can avoid detection by the immune system by wrapping themselves in Nu5GC. And since we don't have the ability to manufacture Nu5GC, nor do our cancer cells, the Nu5GC has to come from our diet. And that may explain why most studies of red meat eaters show a higher incidence of cancer, particularly colon cancer, than in non-red meat eaters. And it's this Nu5GC cloaking ability. Now, how strong are each of these? That's for you to decide. Does that mean we should never eat any animal product? I don't think so. I eat animal products. I personally consider myself a vegetarian. That means I eat mostly vegetables and nuts, but I supplement my diet, particularly on the weekends, with wild shellfish and wild fish. And that, for me, works out very well. Do I ever have beef? Yes. I will have a 6-ounce grass-fed, grass-finished filet about once every 3 months, quite frankly. I almost never eat pork. Lamb is very rare. Do I have pastured chicken? Yes, I do have pastured chicken, but again, it's a treat rather than a staple in the diet. So all of these factors make up the reasons why animal protein should be not the king of your plate, but should be something way down the list. You know, as a society, we've become obsessed with protein. But the truth is, really, not only should we lessen our animal protein, but we actually need very little protein in our diet in general. Now, why is that? Well, we're actually very thrifty creatures. We're very efficient. And every day, we slough the lining of our intestines into the lumen of our intestines, and that lining is protein. So every day, 20 to 30 grams of protein is recycled. So when you see that, you should be getting 100 grams of protein or 200 grams of protein, and I say you should be getting 50 to 70 grams, remember, these recommendations aren't compensating for the fact that you're actually reabsorbing quite a bit of protein every day from yourself. Not all steak is created equal. So when you're at the store and you're buying your steak to go home and cook, or even if you're at a restaurant, you have to know what to look for and what to avoid. And that's why I'm here. And I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, the beef state. And let me tell you, I know beef. In fact, believe it or not, our high school prom were always held at the Omaha stockyards. No kidding. So beef is my middle name, and beef is my game. So, you want to eat steak? First of all, look for grass-fed and grass-finished beef. Now, we love the idea of corn feeding our beef, our cows. Why? Because that corn-fed beef is marbled with that succulent, delicious fat that gives us the mouthfeel that we associate with a great tasting steak. And it makes the steak incredibly tender. But here's the problem. Corn is just pure omega-6 inflammatory fats. Now, traditionally, cows that are fed on grass have in their fat an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of anywhere from 3 to 5 omega-6 parts to 1 part omega-3 fat. And that's a natural ratio. When we add corn to the mix, that ratio can go up to 25 to 50 to 1 instead of the 3 to 5 that we're looking for. So that juicy, tender, mouth-watering steak becomes an inflammatory fat nightmare. Those fats actually increasingly are realizing as one of the biggest drivers of inflammation in our country particularly. They turn into compounds called aldehydes. One aldehyde that you're probably aware of is formaldehyde, the things that we preserve bodies with. I spent a lot of time around formaldehyde in medical school, and I assure you, you don't want to eat a steak that turns to formaldehyde in your body. And yet, that's exactly what it does. Now, the problem with marbling, and actually the problem with grass-fed, is there's actually no law, no federal law that tells you what grass-fed means. Technically, all cows eat grass for some part of their life. If you then feed them grass for even one day, as an example, and then take them to the feedlot and give them corn and soybeans for the rest of their lives, legally, there's nothing to stop the company from telling this is grass-fed beef. What good producers will do is they'll feed them for grass most of their lives, but then to give you the mouthfeel you're looking for, they'll take them to the feedlot and feed them corn and soybeans or corn only for about 6 weeks to fatten them up for slaughter and to give you that mouthfeel. The way around that is to look for grass-fed and grass-finished beef. Now you'll see it in some of the high-end markets. You can certainly find it on the internet. But if you're going to have your beef, that's what you're looking for, because it's going to have much better proper ratios of omega-6 to omega-3. So labeling is really deceptive. And if you have any doubt, contact the company and ask what they do. Now, I'm old enough to remember that back in the old days, but even in Nebraska, beef was very expensive, and they certainly weren't an everyday thing. And cheaper cuts were what the average person could afford, like a chuck steak or a round steak. They were cheap because they had a lot of gristle. And that gristle is actually where gelatin and collagen come from. And it turns out our microbiome actually loves to ferment the gristle and does not ferment muscle as well. So inadvertently, poor people who couldn't afford a lot of meat, and long-lived people in general were eating these old, tough cuts of meat, and they weren't eating very much of it. And they were doing one other thing that I think that's particularly illustrative of how we ought to approach beef, lamb, and pork in general. So they cooked them all day long. My mother would cook a pot roast all day long for us, and we'd have it actually multiple days, and that gristle would break down, and unbeknownst to us, we were actually having gelatin and collagen on almost a daily basis in these meats. We also actually benefited from gelatin almost every day in the form of Jell-O. Now, Jell-O is not a health food, folks, but believe it or not, almost every day of our lives, we were having gelatin in the form of Jell-O. Now, don't rush out and buy Jell-O. There's lots of easier ways to get gelatin into your life. But the point is, we were also having a soup in those days called consommé. And in fancy restaurants, you even had chilled consommé as an appetizer. And consommé was simply high-end bone broth. Now, don't rush out and buy bone broth, because bone broth, the arsenic and lead in bones is actually remarkably high. So be careful when you're eating steaks. And for goodness sakes, please, please, please avoid the steaks that have all the marbling. You're much safer to have a filet that's grass-fed, grass-finished than a ribeye, even if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, because it's going to have much less of the harmful fats. Now, something that I've been researching for my upcoming book, and something I research in going to countries like Portugal, like Spain, like France, like Italy, is that these people, particularly the poorer parts of these countries, use a lot of sausages, fermented meats in their diet. In fact, the country with the longest lifespan is actually a tiny country between France and Spain called Andorra. Andorrans have a lifespan of 87.7 years. Pretty spectacular. And Andorrans do two things. They eat sausages every day. Now, these are fermented sausages. People are poor and they can't waste animals. So they eat everything, the saying is, from snout to tail. But to preserve these foods, they actually grind them up and make sausages. And the sausages are preserved by fermentation. The fermentation does a lot of really cool things that you'll hear about in the upcoming book. But among other things, just to tease you, fermentation makes these incredible mitochondrial uncouplers, polyamines. And polyamines promote longevity in multiple ways. The other thing that it does is it breaks down some of the really health-destroying compounds that I write about in beef, lamb, and pork called Nu-5-GC. So these folks, because they were poor, actually got tremendous health benefits by fermenting their beef products. So sausages traditionally prepared from Italy, from Spain, from France, from Portugal are actually pretty doggone good health foods. But that doesn't mean you can go to the grocery store and say, hi, I want a pound of sausage meat or fresh sausage, and think you're going to get the same benefit. Au contraire, these are not properly prepared, and they will do you more harm than good. All right, so if you want to have your meat, have it, but in moderation, of course. Fill your plate with vegetables and make meat the garnish. You should also try to decrease your consumption of meat for many reasons that you'll learn about in the new book. But if you want to treat yourself to a steak every once in a while, I get it. When my wife and I have a steak, we buy a filet and we split it. And we get the flavor we want, but we're not killing ourselves in the process. More amazing episodes just like this one. Watch now. These super long-lived people around the world they eat a lot of sausages and salamis and prosciutto. And I'm going, that doesn't make any sense. They ought to be dead as doornails. They ought to be, riddled with cancer. They ought to have heart disease. In fact, Toulouse, France, they eat foie gras, they eat sausages, cassoulet, and they have the lowest heart disease rate in all of France.